Right now, we're fighting an opioid epidemic in the United States, and most people think that that has to do with heroin. But the leading cause of overdoses is actually from prescription medications. And I'm here today to tell you my story about how I became a prescription drug addict. Hey, this is Chris from the Rewired Soul, where we talk about the problem but focus on the solution. And this is Ask an Addict. Like I said, I'm going to be sharing with you my story of how I developed a prescription drug addiction, where it took me, and also I hope to give you some tips on how I got clean and how I've stayed away from those medications, and I live an amazing life today. So I started out as an alcoholic, like full-blown alcoholic, and I'll do another video on that at some point, but alcohol was destroying my life. I was having problems at work. I couldn't hold a job. Everybody hated me. I was a drunken mess just constantly. And when it came to prescription opioids, painkillers were my drug of choice. I was prescribed them when I was a teenager. I hurt my knee. I tore a bunch of ligaments in my knee when I was about 16 years old, 15 or 16 years old, and they prescribed me Loratabs or Vicodin or something. And I remember taking one of them. I threw up and I was like, I'm a man. I don't need to take these medications. And I ended up throwing them away and just dealing with the pain. And that's how it used to be for me. So later on, when I started dabbling with prescription painkillers, my brain told me, like, you don't have a problem with these medications. You were able to throw them away in the past. But I didn't really understand the neurological changes that happened in my brain between when I was 15 and when I was in my early 20s and my alcoholism developed. So my son, when I found out he was going to be born, I decided that I was going to clean up my act. I was going to get sober. I was going to be the father this kid needed. And I knew that I couldn't do that with alcohol still in my life. And even after he was born, I was still drinking quite a bit. But he was born via C-section. And my son's mom was prescribed, I want to say it was 100 or 200 Loratabs, right? And those made her sick, and she actually went back to the doctor and they gave her the exact same quantity but of Percocets. And something that I talk about a lot is how the medical industry and doctors, they overprescribe medications. And you know, when she was getting that many pills, there needs to be something in place to get the other ones back. But anyways, that was kind of when I was introduced or reintroduced back into painkillers. And I started taking them, and I realized, like, this light bulb just went off in my head. I'm like, wait a second. I'm like, these make me feel the same way that alcohol does, but there's no hangover. I don't smell like booze. I'm not getting blackout drunk and doing stupid things. Like, I felt like I had a lot more control. So to me, switching over to prescription painkillers was actually better. So it didn't take long for someone to teach me all the tricks about crushing them up and snorting them. But when I was going to work, and work was one of my biggest triggers, I worked in a very stressful job. And every morning I would go and I would take just handfuls of the pills that my son's mom was prescribed, and I would take them to work. And I was really only doing like maybe 3 or 4 a day. I would take them. They would last me a couple hours. I would take some more, and that's what I was doing. But obviously, there comes a time when those prescriptions run out. So a lot of people who struggle with prescription drug addiction, they're being prescribed these medications. They are on a pain management program. But when you get a C-section, they're not going to keep prescribing you these medications. And especially because my son's mom wasn't a pill addict. She wasn't trying to trick the doctors into giving her more. Once her pain was gone, she just was done with it. And she didn't really have an issue with me taking these pills, because obviously she knew I was taking them, but she didn't really have an issue because she saw that I wasn't as bad as I was when I was drinking so much. And that's a whole nother topic about how sometimes our loved ones enable us without even knowing it. Much like myself, she was like, oh, well, this is better. So when those medications ran out, that's when I started to go crazy. even when they were close to running out. And if you're an addict like me, like as soon as you're almost about to run out, then your mind starts racing. So I started reaching out to, man, just a ton of people, like a ton of people on my friends list on Facebook, and just asking them like, hey, you know, my kid's mom, she had a C-section and she's in a lot of pain, and we need some pills, but the doctors, those evil doctors won't prescribe us anymore. But really, I was just looking for a drug dealer. So it didn't take long for me to find a drug dealer and start buying these pills illegally. And pills are very expensive. And I ended up, the car dealership I worked at ended up shutting down. So I was on unemployment for a long time. So I was getting unemployment checks, but a lot of that money was going towards pills. And it was crazy. Like a lot of that money. And I had to hide it from my kid's mom, just, you know, calling my drug dealer and setting up these like really shady meetups. And one of the things I did was, like, I never took out the trash, but when he was coming, I was like, oh, I'm gonna go take the trash out. Like, maybe it was like only a quarter of the way full, and I'm like, oh yeah, I think I should go take this trash out. So that went on for a while, and obviously she knew that we were having some money issues, but I was just lying and manipulating and just not really telling her, you know, what I was doing. And eventually I ended up getting a job in California after being unemployed for about, 7 or 8 months. And this job in California, I literally took all the money we had left. I drove down there with my friend. I nailed the interview, right? And about a week later, they said, yep, you got the job. Just come down here. All you got to do is pass a drug test and you're ready to go. And I remember, and like any of you addicts out there who have had to go take a drug test, oh, you know what I'm talking about. I legit, oh my God, I spent hours upon hours upon hours upon hours just on Google. How long do these medications stay in your system? How to pass a drug test, all these things. And I was going crazy and I was getting angry because everybody had different answers and all this stuff. And I'm like, I am about to uproot my family. And if I do not get this job, we are screwed. Like, that's how powerful the disease of addiction is. Like, I could not stop, even though it was affecting my son and my son's mom, who were solely relying on me to get this job. And I have no idea how I managed to white knuckle it and not do pills up until the time where I got, when I had to take that drug test. And I ended up passing it and getting that job. But the insanity of this addiction, like, just think about what I did. I uprooted my family, brought them to California for this new opportunity. It was a great job, paid a lot of money. It was in California. California is expensive. And it took weeks, like just weeks, for me to start going around to the different technicians in the shop who I worked with and was like, oh, hey man, you know, I got this really bad neck ache or a back injury or whatever. And like, do you have anything? Because most of the time someone will say like, oh yeah, I got some Advil, I got some ibuprofen. But every now and then I would run into somebody who said, yeah, I got these pain medications that I don't take. Here you go. And that is sort of how I started finding drug dealers in my new area. And that's the thing with prescription drugs. When you find dealers, they are not the typical dealer that you think of. It's not that dude standing on the corner. It's not the dude living in the hood or the woman or anything like that. Like, when it comes to prescription medications, a lot of the times we get them from very normal people who just aren't taking those medications. So that's what I started doing. So I was putting this brand new job in jeopardy just to get these pills. And it was insane. And at this point, my drinking actually started escalating again. And I was given an ultimatum by my girlfriend and my mom that I needed to go get help through a 12-step program, or she was gonna take the kid and go back to Las Vegas. And I managed to stay clean for about 3 months. And that's when I started manipulating her a little bit, and just, I told her, I'm like, well, alcohol's my problem. Prescription drugs aren't my problem, because, right, I'm not as crazy when I'm just doing pills, even though I'm spending a lot of money on them. And she was like, yeah, I guess that's fine. So I manipulated her into letting me get back into pills. And a whole nother video about my alcoholism, I eventually manipulated her into thinking it was okay for me to drink again. And that's what I did. And eventually I ended up losing that job, and we had to come back to Las Vegas, and she ended up leaving me, and now I'm a single dad. I'm lonely, I'm depressed, and I was able to get another job, and most of my money was going to pills. And at this point, it was getting really bad. It was bad just because of my depression, and I felt bad for my son and how much of a screw up I was. But us addicts, it's crazy because our addiction makes us depressed, and in order to overcome our depression, we use more drugs. And it's completely nuts. And I just started spending a lot of money. Now that I was back in Vegas, I had my drug dealers again. I found new drug dealers, and I just kept spending all my money on these things. Like when I was at work, I was the type of guy where I could not work or do my job. I would not answer phone calls. I would not call people back. I was barely helping out customers who were showing up to the car dealership until my drug dealers texted me back or called me back and told me when we could meet up. Like, that's how powerful that obsession was. And by this time, I'm spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars a week. Probably, depending on the week and how much money I had, probably about $1,000. And at that point too, you start running out of money because you have bills to pay. And that's when I start lying and manipulating my family. Oh, my son, he needs new clothes, or we need this. And all these things were true, but I was spending all my money on drugs. That's why I needed these other things. Now, my pill addiction got so much worse when I started working at this call center. All right, so in case you didn't catch that, I lost yet another job. Because, all I could do was get high all day while I was at work. And I got a job at a call center, but it was the job of my dreams. You know why? Because everybody at that call center was doing drugs. I'll never forget. I remember one of my buddies saying, oh yeah, so-and-so, she has a bunch of pills. And it was like this sweet little old lady. Remember, a lot of pill dealers are not who you think they are. And I just went up to her, I'm like, hey, I got this headache. And she's like, oh, come here, baby. I got something for you. She opens up her purse, has like a gallon Ziploc bag just filled with painkillers. I don't even know what they were. And she's like, yeah, just go and get yourself a handful. I'm like, all right. And everybody there was doing it. And now I start developing this community, and all of us were doing pills. And this is when it just started getting crazy. Some of the people there were getting prescribed them. Me, I had drug dealers on the outside who I was going to, and I was often playing the middleman between my drug dealer and the people I worked with. And I would have them give me extra money, like, hey, if I'm hooking you up with pills, or I would tell them that the pills were more, and that way I got my supply too. And it just kept progressing and progressing. And prescription drug addiction, like, we make every single excuse in the book. Like, I could stub my pinky toe and it would justify me snorting a morphine pill. Like, it was crazy. And it got to the point where I was going into the bathroom just every hour, crushing up pills, snorting them in there. And then you get so insane. Like, just to put this into view for you, I was the manager of the customer service department. And I'm sitting there, and I have a desk with a tiny wall, like maybe only about that high, if you could see it. And I ended up just saying, screw it, like, why am I even going to the bathroom? And I started just snorting pills at my desk. You heard me. I started snorting pills at my desk at work. And I just didn't think it was that big of a deal because everybody else was doing it. I remember going into meetings with the owners of the company and just nodding off in their meetings, and I guess it's because I'm overweight, but they thought I had diabetes and low blood sugar or something like that. And the owner, like, she was diabetic, and she was like, here, let me take your blood sugar. And she like pricked my finger, and she's like, huh, your blood sugar's fine and stuff. And I'm sitting there like, well, yeah, I've just been getting high all day, but I kept doing it, and I ended up leaving that job, but it was not, for once, it wasn't really related to pills or alcohol, but it was related to my disease of addiction. A lot of it came from my pride and my ego. My pride and my ego are my two worst enemies, and they are for a lot of you out there who are struggling with addiction or struggling with recovery. Our pride and ego is just, it keeps us closed-minded, stubborn, and it keeps us sick. And I ended up leaving that job. Now, keep in mind, I didn't have health insurance, And I'm spending hundreds of dollars a day on pills, and I'm doing shady things to get money. I ended up getting my truck impounded, and I would pay my drug dealer extra to drive and deliver me pills. And I ended up having a lot of health issues, and I started going to the emergency room every other week. I was swelling up from my feet all the way up to my abdomen. And that was not only the pills, but I was also drinking very heavily, and I ended up starting to do cocaine too. So when you're drinking, doing pills, and cocaine, you're putting a lot of stress on your heart. And when you're overweight, that is not good. So I kept going to the emergency room every other week, and I would go in there, and they would treat me like crap because they knew I was just trying to get pills, and they would end up prescribing them to me. I'd leave, and the next thing you know, I would just come back 2 weeks later with the exact same issue. And it was just this cycle over and over, and I was just slowly killing myself. And during these last 4 months before I got clean, I wasn't allowed to see my son or anything like that because all I would do is sleep and nod out. And my son would tell his mom that, and he was only 3 years old. And I wasn't allowed to see him, and I was just so depressed and in a dark place, and I actually just wanted to die. They ended up admitting me into the hospital finally, and found out I had congestive heart failure at 26 years old. My heart was the size of my lung, if you can imagine that. And my family was begging me to stop, and they knew what I was doing and all this stuff, and I wasn't hearing any of it. I just thought I was doomed to die a drug addict. So my mom was going to take me back with her to California because I literally had nothing left. And when she went to go get the rental car to drive me back to California, this is how crazy addiction is and how much drug dealers want money. I was in the cardiac critical care unit, okay? I was dying of congestive heart failure, hooked up on an oxygen machine, IVs, all that stuff. And I was able to text my drug dealer when my mom went to go get her rental car, and he came and delivered me $200 worth of pills because he owed me some money. So he brought those to me in the hospital as I lay there dying. And if you're like me, you know that if you're going out of state, you need to bring a supply with you. And I had no idea when I was going to get pills again. So I brought them with me to California I started snorting morphine pills when my mom wasn't around, and my mom is in recovery too, so I was putting her recovery in jeopardy. And, you know, if you're a drug dealer like me, you know when you get that really, really good hiding spot, that great hiding spot, that's what I found. And one morning, I was up until about 4 a.m. snorting morphine in the kitchen, fell asleep, and my mom wakes me up in the morning, and she found my bag of pills in my amazing hiding spot. And I was furious. I was furious not because she found them, but because she told me that she went to the pharmacy, that she found out what they were, and she flushed them. And I lost my mind. I flipped out on her because addiction affects our survival instincts. And I was like, how am I going to live? It was almost like she just said, I'm taking your oxygen away from you. And I was losing it. But thank God she did, because that started me on the path to recovery. And I am just so extremely fortunate for this because I never got into heroin, okay? My addiction progressed. Like all the things that I said I would never do, I said I was never gonna drink. I said I was never gonna become a drug addict. And then I turned into a pill addict. I said I was never gonna try cocaine. I ended up trying cocaine. And like, if you are a prescription drug addict, you know how expensive these pills are. Had I not been stopped, if I even survived much longer, I would have turned to heroin. Heroin is stronger, it's cheaper, and I had been offered it before, and I was running out of money. And this is the common reason why people go from prescription opioids over to heroin, because we can no longer fund our habit. So I'm very, very fortunate that I was able to stop before I found heroin. Now, the question that I get a lot about my recovery, and it's something that I had reservations about when I got sober, was like, what if I have pain? What if I have a legitimate reason to take these pills? And I remember telling my sponsor that and my mom that. I was like, if I'm ever like in pain, I'm gonna take these medications. And you know, through my recovery and learning to just take it a day at a time, I ended up realizing that I'm not in pain, so I don't even need to think about that right now. I'll never forget, when I was 2 years sober, I was back in Las Vegas and I was hanging out with an old friend who knew about my pill problem, and she asked me, she's like, well, what if you're ever in pain? What if you like get into a car accident or something? And luckily at that point, you know, I had it together in my brain. I was like, you know, I'm not in pain right now, so I don't even worry about it. And I am not even lying to you. The next week, the very next week, I got into my first car accident. And this wasn't a minor fender bender. I'm talking head-on collision, spinning out of control. My dashboard crashed down on my legs. My seatbelt tore me up. It left bruises all over this chunky stomach of mine. And I was in a lot of pain. And it finally happened. But my very first thought was that I do not want to relapse. My life was so amazing. Like the fact that I was even driving was amazing because I didn't have my license for almost 2 years. So I just got that car. I didn't want to relapse. And this is huge. Like I had to get it in my brain like that this could take me out. It's part of my story that I left off was one of the times when I was clean from pills for 3 months, my relapse started with one Vicodin pill. One Vicodin pill that I was prescribed by an emergency room. They gave me those medications and I looked at that bottle. I had 3 months sober and I said, well, I could take these. Any idiot can take one as needed every 4 hours. I could do that. And I couldn't. I took one. Within minutes, I took another 3. The next day, I was calling my drug dealer, and that's took off a whole 1.5 year long relapse that led to me finally getting clean. So I was deathly afraid of going to the hospital after my car accident. The paramedics showed up, the fire department showed up, and they're like, hey, do you need to go to the emergency room? And I probably did, but I told them, no, I'm good. And I literally waddled my chunky butt home with my injuries because it was only about a block away from my house. And I went home because I did not want to go to the emergency room because I did not trust myself. Luckily, I have people in my life today who love me and care about me. So the next day they're like, yo, Chris, you need to go to the emergency room because there's something called internal bleeding. You should get that checked out. So what I did was I took one of my best friends with me, who I actually worked with, and she came with me to the hospital to make sure I didn't do anything stupid. So, tip for anybody out there who is recovering from an opioid addiction. I went up to that nurse when you check in and I said 2 things. I'm allergic to narcotic pain medications. Second thing, I am a recovering pill addict. I cannot take narcotic medications. I made that very clear. She gave me not 1, but 2 different wristbands. 1, this guy is a recovering drug addict. 2, this guy is allergic to these medications. Like, I have to call myself out on these things so I don't have that little secret back door to fuel my addiction and to spark my relapse, right? So what I tell my clients all the time when I share this story is that if you get nothing else from this specific story about my car accident, it is this: your recovery is your responsibility. The reason I say that is even with these 2 wristbands, the doctor who saw me offered me pain medications, narcotic pain medications, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 times. Like, the addict part of me was like, yo, where were you when I was in my addiction? But we have to talk about this because our addiction wants to use that as an excuse to relapse. Well, a doctor said, you know, I could take these and he knows I'm a drug addict. So the unfortunate reality is a lot of doctors are not. They are not educated in the field of addiction. So that is why our recovery is our responsibility. And to end that story, that doctor also sent me off with a prescription for Norcos, which are a narcotic pain medications. Luckily, I had the strength. Like, see, I could have taken that and shoved it in my pocket. You know, he gave them to me, but I crumpled it up and threw it away. And this is what I tell everybody. If you are struggling with pain or a situation like myself, know this. Ibuprofen 800s work wonders. I was literally blown away by the fact that these medications that are non-narcotic actually helped with my pain. See, what you got to realize is a lot of pain medications don't actually treat the pain. All they do is block certain receptors and they get you high. So something like ibuprofen, which is an anti-inflammatory, and basically I was just swollen and bruised up. I didn't have any other kind of internal injuries or broken bones, and it greatly helped with my pain, and I was able to get through that situation without relapsing. Now, since that happened, I have been to the emergency room on 3 other occasions for intense pain. And I can do other videos about that if you would like. Leave comments down below. But I managed to get through every single one of those situations without taking a pain med. And trust me, I dealt with some of the most excruciating pain in my life, and I was able to get through every single one without taking a pill. So it's very important that on a daily basis, I remember that I am a prescription drug addict. Hell, I am an addict in the worst possible way. I can become addicted to anything. Like, just to let you know, like, to this day, I still do not take NyQuil. No matter how sick I am, I refuse to take NyQuil because NyQuil is a substance that I used to abuse. When I was feeling depressed, when all I wanted to do was sleep, what I would do, I would chug an entire bottle of NyQuil just to pass out. So that is a very slippery slope for me. I have to realize that my day-to-day life is a minefield and I have to tiptoe through it so I do not relapse. Now, for any of you listening to this and you're in early sobriety and you're thinking, oh my God, this is gonna be so difficult, I gotta do this for the rest of my life. No. Like with anything else, the longer you do it, the easier it gets. A lot of these things are just automated in my mind. I'm not like walking through the grocery store and like dodging the liquor aisle and then dodging the NyQuil and not walking near the pharmacy. Those are not things that I'm doing. These are just things that I have developed in my mind, and they're just habit where I know what to do, what not to do. I can walk past a pharmacy without thinking about jumping over the counter and stealing all their oxys. Like, it gets easier over time. But I had to do this day by day by day. Something I will mention, for opioid cravings and early recovery, the medication naltrexone saved my life. It greatly diminished my cravings. I will leave an info card up top that you can click where I talk about naltrexone a little bit, but I will do a more dedicated video about naltrexone and Vivitrol, but it greatly reduced my cravings the first 6 months that I got clean, and that kind of was kind of like my training wheels. So if you're recovering from a prescription opioid addiction, like, definitely check out naltrexone and Rivia. If you want me to do more videos on that, leave comments, but that really helped save my life. But like I said, we're here to talk about the problem and focus on the solution. Like, please, 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 if you have any questions about staying clean from prescription drug addiction, prescription painkiller addiction, opioids in general, leave comments down below, ask me questions. I love when people ask me questions because I want to provide you with solutions that are scientifically based or based on my experience. And if you know anybody who is struggling to stay sober from prescription drugs or stay sober from heroin or anything, share this video with them. Please share it. Let them know that a hopeless pain pill addict like myself who loves opioids, I love opioids. If a hopeless drug addict like me can stay clean for 5 years, so can they. So please share this video with them to give them some hope. But as always, this is Chris from the Rewired Soul, and if you haven't yet, right below this video, there's a subscribe button, a little circle with my beautiful face. Click that, hit subscribe. I'm always doing content about how to improve your mental health, how to stay sober, and just generally anything that helps us get out of this thing right here. All right, so thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.